Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm reviewing The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck in, once again, another beautiful Easton Press edition. This one has lithographs by Thomas Hart Benton. If you don't know who Thomas Hart Benton is, he's a famous American artist. And, I mean, it's beautiful. And you really get taken to this time period of the Dust Bowl in 1930s America. But reading it, I was reminded of a quote by William Faulkner, in which he says, the past is not over. In fact, it's not even past. And reading The Grapes of Wrath doesn't feel like reading history. It feels like reading the present day, because I don't think we've managed to learn our lessons. You have the Joad family escaping bad agricultural conditions and bad financial conditions in Oklahoma, along with many other people in that generation, and promised the fields of California will be waiting for them. They get on the road with all their possessions, they sell everything they have, and they straggle out there, and they find out things are not as was promised. Big surprise. And why I say that the past is still present with us, reading this, I was reminded of two other nonfiction books. One, very recent, Nomadland by Jessica Bruder, in which she follows mostly elderly people who are living in RVs or vans and who move around the country nomadically to take seasonal jobs or to work in Amazon warehouses. Again, seasonally, because those aren't necessarily year-round jobs. And the fairly brutal conditions that these people are subjected to. One very infamous situation was when temperatures were north of 100 degrees Fahrenheit in a Pennsylvania warehouse, but to prevent theft, the managers at Amazon had closed all the bay doors, and they had ambulances on standby outside the warehouse for when people would collapse. So needless to say, walking for 10 to 12 hours on concrete floors doesn't necessarily do wonders for anybody's health condition, but certainly not for older people. And the fragility of having to live your life nomadically in a society that doesn't allow for it. The legislation doesn't really allow for people to be without an address, and then they have to use apps to find out where can they park without getting in trouble with the police. Walmart parking lots, Cracker Barrel parking lots. It's shameful. It's only one more shameful thing that America is responsible for because of the world we've created for ourselves. But Nomadland is something that you should read either in concert with this book or after you've read it to remind yourself that The Grapes of Wrath is not something that happened in the past. It's still happening today. The other is Small is Beautiful by E.F. Schumacher, which is a wonderful book about economics in general and about the dangers and challenges with industrialization. And again, when we think about industrialization, it's not a question of the railroad and building things with technology. It's also what happens to these farmers. They're industrializing the farming process. Instead of having small farmers across many different plots of land and allowing ownership to percolate across a population that way, you have large-scale industrial farming with extremely expensive equipment, putting farmers deep into debt, then requiring subsidies from the government. And this just puts those individual farmers, the small ones that I know, into huge financial problems today, and leads the U.S. agribusiness economy into having 6 or 7 big players which have most of the land in America. And you never want to be in a situation where you have 6 or 7 companies controlling the entire food production of a country, especially a country as enormous as the United States. So just something to think about before we even get into the story of The Grapes of Wrath is take a look around you. The lessons of The Grapes of Wrath are still with us. Now, as for the story itself, we have the Joad family and this question of family being together. This is another question in our location-independent society where people can go live where they want to live. I'm one of those people. I live in France, born in Singapore, lived many of years of my life in the United States. I have the benefit of choosing where it is that I want to live, but the price that I pay is that I cannot spend as much time with my family as I was like, especially if there's travel restrictions or lockdowns and those sorts of things. However, what's important about this story is that there was no scenario like this in the 1930s, and this was the beginning of that being forced upon these people. So there was no work, there was no money here, we have to move somewhere there is. When we get to the place where we thought there would be, it turns out that it's not there as well, and the family breaks up along the way. We have deaths, we have abandonments, and it's poignant. Set aside that we have these wonderful intercalary chapters inserted by Steinbeck in which we get the points of view of people working at a diner, or people working at a car dealership, or people working at a junk salvage yard where they're basically cheating these farmers. And Steinbeck wrote this in 100 days. It's astonishing, and it's one of those times, and I've mentioned this before in the videos, where you feel completely inadequate as a writer. When someone can put together a work like this in 100 days, you think you're never going to produce anything worth reading. That said, it's a real treat to read. I think I had started it when I was very young, didn't get very far, didn't persevere with it, but it made a lot more sense, and is one more brick in my theory that many books really are unintelligible to you until a certain age in your life, and other books should be read in the meantime that are much more straightforward. There's also plenty of biblical references here. We have essentially a pilgrimage happening from Oklahoma to California. You're going to the promised land. You have a preacher who says he's not a preacher but ends up dying, saying, "You don't know what you're doing," which is a country way of saying, "Father, forgive them, they know not what they do." You have women and children being caught up in this terrible destruction. Normally they're supposed to be saved and preserved, but in this case they're out there having to work 12, 14-hour days, back-breaking labor. They're not spared. There's even at one point a pregnant woman who's out there picking cotton as well, which again is unbelievable, but it's not past. These work conditions are happening across the world right now as we speak, as I'm recording this video. We have inhumane working conditions, and we've become used to them. It's easy to read in a book and be shocked by it, but the reality is it's still happening now, and it's the price that we pay for having a so-called global economy and this modern market economy. This modern market economy, which, by the way, leads to sometimes having to burn corn or burn strawberries or throw bleach onto oranges to make sure that they're not eaten because of the market conditions being more expensive to pick something than profit that would be gained from selling it. And no one stops to ask, what is wrong with our society in which we are letting fruit rot from the vine, or we're having to throw bleach onto oranges? There's something deeply wrong. We built this economic system. If this economic system yields results like this, then it needs to change. And people have it in their head that capitalism is some great, wonderful thing that has been given to us by God. But the reality is market economies, so people get their terms mixed up, capitalism and a market economy. A market economy is simply where I have something, you want to buy it from me, you can buy it from me. That's not capitalism. That's existed since biblical times. You make something, someone else buys it from you. That's not capitalism. And capitalism is a more a form of a market economy which, dependent on how your situation implements it, can become very corrupt. We don't really have a situation in which capitalism has avoided these problems. So, for example, China has a semi-capitalist system at this point. The United States has this crony capitalism. Europe has this weird government capitalism as well. But in all of these situations, there is capital that is accrued by a group of people, and they are who dictate the economy. That is not the same thing as a market economy. So sometimes people give capitalism credit for which it does not deserve. Capitalism didn't invent buying and selling. That has existed for forever. That's called a market economy. But this idea of what modern capitalism is, and especially how it's been practiced in the United States, leads to gross inequalities. And people say, well, that's just how the market is. But that's just the brainwashing that has come down to us, and it's from people who haven't bothered to study economics. And if you go out there and you study it, you can see that there are problems in the way that the system is set up. We could set it up differently, but that would require studying, that would require thoughtful and educated government officials, which we don't have. And that's why we will continue to reap the grapes of wrath that didn't start in the 1930s, was memorialized for us in a book in the 1930s, but is still with us to this day. The grapes of wrath is not something that has passed, it's something that we continue to live because we continue to forget about our responsibilities to our fellow humans. We forget to think about how to create an economic system that gives opportunities to everybody, and we forget about creating a government that holds our governmental officials accountable. So people can just shrug their shoulders and say, that's how it is, and show me how it's been done better, and the regular trope of the United States is the greatest country in the history of mankind, which is total garbage. But the idea that that's how it is just a perfect example of the idea that of complacency. That's how you get the grapes of wrath in the first place. That's just how it is. Live with it. Surely there are things that cannot be changed by one individual or even an entire country. But the idea to not even make an effort, to give up before it's even started, I think that's fairly shameful. And that's one more reason to read this book, to get further evidence through the frame of a fictional story that was based in many conversations that Steinbeck had. He lived with a lot of these people for weeks at a time, to get a sense of what this world looks like and how it bears so many resemblances to our modern situation, which in many ways is much, much worse than the time of the Okies. If you enjoyed this review, please feel free to hit the like button. If you'd like to see more, hit subscribe. That way the YouTube algorithm will suggest more of my videos to you. If you'd like to support my work, I have a Patreon, and on that Patreon I do an exclusive review just for my patrons once a month. So you'd get to see that hidden video as well, months before it comes out to the general public. Otherwise, thanks for taking the time to watch this, and enjoy your reading.